but I'd like to start with devotees just hearing a little bit about how they first got connected and first gotten involved with ISKCON, with Hare Krishna movement.
Yeah,
You could share that.
sure. I was born in San Francisco, raised in Marin County, and I was from a very young age searching, very seriously searching. So I was reading a lot of different books, and by chance I came across Prabhupada's books in a bookstore in Sausalito, which I wound up buying for my father because we were reading books at night together.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't read them at that time for different reasons, but I got them when I was 13, and I did it for a lot of a long story, very interesting story, but cut to the chase. I read Prabhupada's books when I was I don't know if I had turned 16. Yeah, I think I had turned 16, and I had a very powerful experience when I read Prabhupada's books. Literally that day, it was Easy Journey to Other Planets and Beyond Birth and Death. And that day, my world changed drastically. Like I saw the bhakti perspective. I was no longer the daughter of my parents, the sister of my brothers and sister. I experienced a very powerful transformation. And it was the answer to a prayer that I had for about 8 years.
Wow.
And it came an important point in my life. And I therefore, shortly thereafter, a couple months later, I visited the Los Angeles temple. And 2 weeks later, I moved into the temple and never left. So that was 1975. And then I saw Srila Prabhupada on his last visit to Los Angeles in June of 1976, at which time he initiated me. So there's a lot more to the story, but that's basically how I came.
Wow.
Through his books, and it meant everything to me to be associated with the philosophy.
Wow.
And Prabhupada.
That's amazing. It's amazing how many devotees had that similar kind of, I mean, you can just see how it's clearly something that you're picking up.
Picking it up. It seems like it.
Oh, definitely.
Seems like
Definitely. And in many cases, it's special, how so many devotees came right in time to meet Prabhupada and get connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was already 76. So then, where were you serving in 77? And as things were transitioning, Prabhupada's departing, where do you?
Yeah, I was traveling quite a bit. I was in I went from LA to Santo Domingo in the Caribbean, and then we went to Puerto Rico, and we were in Puerto Rico only a couple days when we got news of Prabhupada leaving. So I was in Puerto Rico, and it was announced pretty early on that these 11 devotees would be giving initiation to those who were waiting for initiation and those who came from there then.
Okay. One experience I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned in your book, you had come to NYC, to the temple, the 55th Street Temple, and you had a dream about Srila Prabhupada. Could you share that story? What happened?
Yeah, well, I wasn't completely aware of all the controversies going on in ISKCON between Grihastas and the sannyasis, although it wasn't that it was unknown. And I was also, aware of the women's parties in New York, New Vrindavan, Berkeley. I had been placed on the LA party temporarily, and then the airport opened back up, so we went back into the airport and I was no longer on that party. But I was quite disturbed by these parties, and our LA party had spent some time with the Berkeley party, and what they were telling me was very disturbing. It was all hush hush, don't say anything. It was, behind closed doors, just the women talking to the women. And so I had that experience, but I put these all that was all, it was not in the forefront of my mind, because I was engaged in service and happily engaged and
Yeah.
just feeling so much ecstasy, participating in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement and chanting Hare Krishna and all the programs that we had. So it really wasn't in the forefront of my mind. And although there was, like I remember in Los Angeles, there was, the women were saying, Tamal Krishna Maharaj is coming, hide yourself, because he wants to send all the women to Australia. And it was very it was tense,
Was
So there
that
was some,
was that a joke, or was that?
no, that was serious. That was something contemplated in the movement for a while. It was going around as a serious thing that Tamal Krishna Maharaj was presenting to Srila Prabhupada, that the women should be sent to Australia, all the women.
So bizarre. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, so but we had heard it, and it was serious, and it was like, just hide out. This person is very unfavorable to women, and we don't know what to expect.
I see.
So those things had happened, but they weren't, like I said, they weren't the forefront of my mind. I
Yeah.
was just immersed in devotion and seva and sadhana, and just ecstatic, actually.
Yeah.
So when I went to New York, as I said, these things weren't on the forefront of my mind. New York, I arrived in New York in April, so it was, Prabhupada left in November, so it was just, 6 months after Prabhupada left the planet.
Yeah.
And I had, being a woman in ISKCON, it was pretty clear that you were low class.
Yeah.
And the classes, pretty much every day or every other day, you were a representative Maya, you were less intelligent, stay out of the way, men are better. It was just every day. And I always think how in 55th Street, where the devotees lived in the building, which was a 12-story building, as I recall, 11 or 12-story, very much indicated like the where you were in the status within ISKCON, right? So it's sannyasis, brahmacharis, grahastas, women. It was like, I don't remember exactly if the women were below the grahastas. I think maybe the women were below the grahastas and the grahastas were higher. But it was, there was a social structure that was very well etched out. If it wasn't spoken, it wasn't openly spoken, but everything about how things were organized and executed were, you knew where you belonged. And so like I said, these things weren't on my mind, but I was noticing them, and it was certainly before I just finally felt like something has to be done. Something's really wrong here. That happened in 1985, so this was 1978. And I had a dream one night. Prabhupada came to me and he said he was very distressed about the situation of grahastas and sannyasis and the women, and how this dissension between the groups was going to harm his movement and something should be done. And I just looked at him and I was like, I'm clueless. I mean, I'm the lowest on the rung here. And I don't really know all the details of the controversy, but he told me about that in a dream. And I just didn't know what to do. So basically, I really just forgot about that dream. I didn't do anything. I just forgot about the dream. And then when the situation became very disturbing for me in 1984, 85, this was just before the Guru Reform meeting in New Vrindavan. And that was the focus of everyone's attention, was the Guru issue. But I was disturbed by how my god sisters were being treated everywhere. That I had, by chance, I was traveling to all these temples. I was in LA, New York, Puerto Rico, Santo Domingo, Berkeley. And I was seeing how the women were being treated. And then, my memories of meeting with the devotees in Berkeley on the party and what was happening to them. And we're talking about rape, broken arms, just full-on abuse, and New Vrindavan as well, just horrific abuse. So I started thinking, no, this isn't right, and no one's talking about it, and it's continuing. And I could not stand to see what was happening to my sisters anymore. And so I felt like I had to say, well, first of all, I thought I was going crazy, and I was wrestling with how to become humble. I should be humble, and just people are in charge that are more advanced than me, and I'm just missing something. That's how it initially hit me in the mid-80s, that I have a problem and I'm losing my devotion because I'm not humble enough. I mean, I really went through quite a few years of feeling that my spiritual life was on edge because I was
Yeah.
seeing these things and disturbed by them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so difficult to navigate that kind of, I mean, and it's such a like unimaginable, almost unimaginable how you have such a perfect and pure philosophy and such a
Yeah.
perfect and pure spiritual leader like Srila Prabhupada, and still such perversion.
Well, well, I mean, obviously it's not Prabhupada, it's not the philosophy, it's not even the institution, except to say that the institution is made of individuals. And Prabhupada made it clear, what can I do? People are coming from all walks of life in various stages of their progress or willingness to progress. And, so um, you're dealing with still material energy, right? With
Yeah.
people with contaminated hearts, and people making mistakes. Certainly I've made mistakes, and just immature, immature in spiritual life, immature as people. As you'll hear from speaking to a lot of people, even the managers were in their 30s. I mean,
Yeah. The
I'm
guru.
65. I can't even imagine if I was in that position in my 30s. I mean, it's just what it was and what it is. And there's a sad history to the whole thing. But yeah, it took me until the 90s actually to um, I was so enmeshed with the institution and its Prabhupada's movement, and give everything and try to correct what I saw wrong or participate in any way I could. And it was literally many years that it took me to um, differentiate myself from the institution, which was having so many problems.
Hmm.
And it took a while, no, the institution is not the philosophy. It's Prabhupada's movement, but it's not Prabhupada in a certain
Yes.
way. The way that it's dysfunctional is not Prabhupada.
Yes.
So that was a big learning curve to go from that to really remain loyal to Prabhupada, but differentiate myself, and then really finding the courage to speak up about what I saw as very drastically wrong.
Yeah.
And when I finally did speak up publicly, which began as a letter to my god sister Sodamini, Ravindra Swarup's wife, um, I started hearing about the child abuse, and I was horrified, and it was all also very hush hush. I was just hearing from mothers, from some of the boys coming back from Vrindavan, and I was just livid. Like this wouldn't have happened if we hadn't de-empowered our women and gave them no voice at all to protect themselves and their children. And the repercussions were just so long, so devastating, and so long, broad ranging, that at that point, then I was already pretty upset, but now I became really angry. And I was just like, no, I don't care if, I am removed from the movement, and how many people, discredit me and want to call me certain names, which they did. I just felt like, no, this is not okay. I'm going to stand for honesty and direct forward communication, and hopefully through an actual dialogue, changing things.
Yeah. On that point of devotees pushing back, you said at one point that you received a death threat, or maybe more than one, that you were destroying Prabhupada's movement, and so I mean it's so. And you said, you wrote, you kept thinking when devotees really understood what was going on for women, their hearts would melt and we would be closer as a family.
Yeah.
So my question is, what was their perspective? Like, it's hard for me to empathize or even understand how a person is seeing is it that what was the argument? What was their idea for?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be able to obviously speak to everyone, but I was I was um I was told to marry Nagraj Das in 1985, and he had been a brahmachari for 12 years. I did not want to marry him, but I was told I had to. It was arranged marriage that I had no choice in. But after I started associating with him, it became clear that he, as a brahmachari, had no idea that this was going on.
I
I
see.
mean, absolutely clueless.
Got it.
And he hadn't, I don't know if it was his personality or what, but he hadn't seen how he hadn't registered how women were being treated,
Didn't,
right?
yeah, didn't notice.
He didn't notice it. Now, that's not the case for everyone, because some people intentionally created the situation for women where they were stopped to give Bhagavatam class, they were stopped from leading kirtan, they were told they could not chant japa in the temple room, so we were all outside the temple room, oftentimes in places that didn't have heat, or in the shoe room. And and obviously, like in Potomac where I was, it was a huge temple room. There were practically no men inside. The two heaters were in the inside, but the women could not go inside. We were in the shoe room in the entry, and it was freezing cold. I mean, freezing cold in Washington, DC.
When was
So
there?
that year I was in Potomac. That was in 1984. And I was in Philly in 1983, 82. That was the same situation. We weren't allowed in the temple room. We were allowed to be in the shoe room with no heat.
Yeah,
And it's also quite cold in Philly.
yeah.
LA, you could go into the temple room, but only in the balcony, even though there was plenty of room to be downstairs. I didn't mind that so much. It was a nice chanting facility. But it was like that in many places where women just were not allowed. And then, like there would be a feast, and the men would be served first, the women and children were served last. And if you were in a line, wherever the first woman was, a man would just come up and stand in front of the first woman, even though the children are crying and they need
That was
food.
really
It's been a
painful
long,
for me to read about. That was really difficult.
yeah.
Yeah.
So some people knew, it was organized by some devotees, and it was instituted by managers. And women were complaining. I mean, before, they weren't complaining a lot after a while, but I think it's 72, Ekayani wrote Prabhupada and said, we're not allowed to go into the temple for chanting. And Prabhupada was very disturbed. And he said, what is going on? Of course you can go into the temple.
Yeah.
And in 75, when I was in LA, Jodharani Shamarani was giving Bhagavatam class, but the men were disturbed. So I remember someone had flown to Hawaii to meet with Prabhupada. That's where he was at the time, to complain about Jodharani giving classes. And he was like, no, she can give classes. And then they promptly came back and stopped her from giving classes. I was there. I was witnessing it. I experienced it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have Jamuna's singing of the Govinda prayer
Yeah.
for every temple's greeting of the darshan of the greeting of the deities. And Jaya Sachinandana didn't like that and wanted to stop it. And Prabhupada was kind of bewildered by these things, like what is the problem here?
Yeah.
But the men were disturbed, and so they were in a position of management, and so they put a cap on all of these things.
So was it partly that some men were seeing women are the personification of Maya, women are
Yeah, I
obs
mean that was in every Bhagavatam class wherever I went.
so
It was
women are
almost
the
every
embodiment
day.
of Maya, and we're at war with Maya, and so
Yes.
women are just kind of an inconvenient presence that we have to tolerate.
And that we don't like.
That we
And
don't like.
we're trying to be serious, and they're really probably not that serious, even though we were the ones also collecting all the money. In
Yeah.
fact, in some cases, more than the men.
Yeah.
I mean, we were the ones that were sending money to Vrindavan and Mayapur
Yeah.
and Bombay to build these temples
Yeah.
at the cost of our, at being raped and arms beaten in these parties to do this and to support the temples.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It was a huge sacrifice that
We were doing the same sacrifice as the men, right? We were celibates.
Yeah.
We were chanting our rounds. We were following the four regulative principles. We were making the same kind of sacrifices. In fact, a lot of times more, because we would get less living facility, less prasadam facility. So we were often doing more sacrifices than our God brothers where we were.
Yeah.
But this wasn't acknowledged or
It kind of reminds me in the Bhagavatam when Lord Kapila Dev says that the neophyte, they only think God is in the deity and they don't see God anywhere except in the deity in the temple. And he says that for them, actually, their worship is like pouring ghee onto ashes.
Yeah, that's the quote.
It's kind of like something like that, I guess. I'm just trying to kind of understand what is the...
Well, I mean, the thing is this isn't just history. I mean, it's present history.
Yeah.
I mean, some things have changed in certain temples, and but the prevailing mental perception and attitude exists, and some of it is coming from Prabhupada's books, some of it's coming from, well, some statements that personally myself and others feel have been misunderstood and misrepresented, taking it out of context, not bringing in the broader picture. This was daily preaching for at least a decade before some people started thinking maybe this wasn't good. And then of course now and then you have the predisposition of men to want to control women. I mean, that's historically for millennia, that's what's been going on, right? This is not something new to ISKCON or anything else. And then you have, in addition to that, what I feel is some misunderstandings about Varnashram and how it applies to preaching around the world, that we can't even say that, I mean, I'll give you an example. I am leading different reading groups, and I have different, I do one-on-one mentoring and I do group mentoring with women around the world. And here we are in 2024, when the issue's been fully brought up and is still a hotly debated topic, and I don't bring these things up. I try to avoid these things because it's absolutely an embarrassment to me to see still how women are thought of and treated in many places. And my heart breaks because I'm hearing what some women are going through in certain places. And of course, I see people enter a temple and turn around and say, some women, even men, they'll look at how women are treated and say, this is just unacceptable. I'm not going forward with this. This is heartbreaking. You want to share Krishna consciousness with people, and you can't because of a mundane consideration that if they could just get over the hump initially, they probably would take up bhakti and then, deal with these the controversies in a position of stronger faith. But as an example I was giving, so I was with one group on Sunday, this last Sunday, we're reading Wise Love. These people are not initiated, they're brand new to bhakti. And somebody said, I want to take initiation from a woman, and I hear that's not possible in ISKCON. And it's like, my God, now I have to talk to 10 people who are new to Krishna consciousness on a controversial topic that really shouldn't even be a controversy.
Yeah.
And how I don't want to damn it. I have to be honest, but I also have to be careful not to harm their budding faith and bhakti.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult and frustrating. And then another group on the Monday is some of them, they're not initiated, but they're all been around devotees for a couple years, and they chant. Most of them are chanting. Some of them are chanting 16 rounds and aspiring for initiation. And one woman read to me a passage and just started crying. And she said, how do I accept this? How do I live with this? What am I going to do? And again, I'm on the hot spot to now try to explain and encourage her bhakti to just stay with it and see it in this way, and you can see it in this way. And, people said this and people said that, just try to give them perspective and balance. It's like, that's why do I have to do that?
Yeah.
And I know some of them are going to leave because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's still such a misunderstood topic.
Well, it's not, it's not exactly misunderstood. It's just so emotional for what I see is so much emotion
Yes.
that we cannot have a reasonable conversation one-on-one where you relate to me as a human being, except that I may even have some devotion and intelligence.
Yeah.
And I may have a point to make, and I'm willing to hear from your side and take into what you're saying to inform me and educate myself. But the people that are so opposed to women, they're not willing to have that logical dialogue. Or treat me like a human being with feeling. Like, where is the feeling here? Where is the human feeling here?
Yeah. It's ironic that it's all in the name of Varnashram, because Varnashram is not actually meant to be such a rigid, like stereotyped. Mother Vishaka gave these two really wonderful classes. I think they were originally What's a Woman to Do, and then she re-presented them recently. You were there, I think. I saw you on the video.
Yes, obviously.
Yeah, and so when I share this interview we're doing, I'm planning to link those YouTube videos as like further, because I think she does such a nice job of presenting the depth and breadth of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, his personal approach, and also the reality of Varnashram. It's not a stereotyped system. It's highly personal, highly personal.
And she in those classes, she also gives an understanding of how we read some of these statements that seem to be dismissive or denigrating. And there's a way you read Shastra. You have to read Shastra, not taking things out of context. And getting to the essence of what is being discussed in this section. So she very expertly brings that out in her videos.
In terms of the frustration and the difficulty you're talking about now, one thing I also wanted to ask about was I think you said it was around 86, it was shortly after you started to kind of recognize how dire the situation was, wanting to do something about it, and then you went to Yamuna Devi, your god sister, and asked for help. Could you share a little bit more about that? Where was that, and what was the context, and kind of how did she respond? Why did she respond in the way that she did?
Yeah, so it was in Philadelphia. She had come to Philadelphia because her cookbook had just won the magnificent award that it did win after her years of labor on that cookbook. And I had been aware of how Yamuna felt about how women were treated in ISKCON. And I knew that it was a big problem for her. She didn't speak about it. She didn't tell people about some of her experience. For instance, in Vrindavan, when she was assisting in building the Vrindavan temple, there were some heavy things that happened to her there. And some of that is not even in her biography that Dina Tarani wrote. But I had a sense that all the women were, experiencing what I was seeing, but they were too terrified to speak. But I went up to her before we were in front of the doors to the temple, actually, at the end of the breezeway. And I said to her that we really need to bring this to light within the movement. Too many people are being harmed. I'm very concerned. But I'm too, I'm just a nobody, and she is a somebody. And would she stand with me? And she just looked at me and she said, Pranada, you don't know what you're getting into. And I said, Yamuna, I think I do. And that's why I'm asking you to help me. And she just put her hand on her heart, and tears came to her eyes. And she said, I'm sorry, I can't. It will break my heart. My heart is already broken. And I just felt like, of course, I was going to respect that she had been through a lot, and it was just too much for her to go into. And she knew, because she had dealt with the managers who were still the managers at ISKCON at that time. She knew just how mean they could be.
I see. And how, what's the word, like entrenched in their perspective and in their...
Yeah, there was no movement. There was not going to be any moving these people.
Got it.
They had heard from women, and they were just immovable. They had their idea about who a woman was, who a devotee woman was, and she was to be silenced and in her place. And she could make money. She could go into the street and, in karmi clothes and make money. I was also, one of my sankirtan things, we would sell paintings, and we would knock door to door on people's apartments. And sometimes we were single women knocking on bachelors' doors. It was a very, sometimes dangerous situation. So we were fine to go out and make money. We were fine to be put into questionable situations, but we weren't okay to speak the Bhagavatam, even though we were studying it, even though we weren't allowed to sing, even though our hearts were moved by kirtan. We weren't allowed often to do deity worship. And that's the other thing, like in Vrindavan and Mayapur and Bombay, other Indian temples, women are not allowed on the altar. That was not the case when Prabhupada was here. Women were on the altar and doing sevas. In fact, on the day of Krishna Balaram's installation in Vrindavan, women were on the altar addressing the deities, and Prabhupada told them, Prabhupada knew that. He had them doing that. Women, as you'll see, there, maybe you could link also to this interview. There is a video which describes the women participating in the 24-hour kirtan in Vrindavan, that they were originating members of that kirtan, and they were stopped. And it was not by Prabhupada. He specifically had Arundhati come to Vrindavan to be on the 24-hour kirtan party.
I see. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, like, what's going on in the mind of a person who's seeing it. And the only kind of analogy that coming to mind is like when you see these genocides take place between, like, for example, in Rwanda, and you have this, basically they're not seeing these group of people in this as the same type of human being that I am, and they're like it's like a subhuman practically.
Exactly.
And so therefore I'm totally justified to see them as being ontologically, categorically inferior, and if the Shastra backs me up and all of that. And so then therefore it's just practical. Well,
the Shastra doesn't completely back you up.
It doesn't, but
that's the problem.
Justification.
And Prabhupada's statements don't back you up.
At all, not at all. Yeah.
Right. So, but
from their perspective.
But anyway, you disempower and you disenfranchise and you categorize and you label them. And then it doesn't matter what you do to them.
Yeah.
Or how they feel. It certainly doesn't matter how they feel or what their experience is,
No.
or even how it's affecting the preaching, because you've got it right.
Yeah. That was another.
You've figured it out.
Yeah. That was another thing I wanted to hear about. Was it comes up a little bit in the Emerging Voices book, but one comment that has come up on the topic of the female guru issue is, one person has suggested it's like a distraction topic, that really we need to be thinking about how to fix the preaching and improve the preaching in the West. And like, it's kind of like a joke that the female guru issue will magically fix preaching in the West. But what occurred to me as I'm reading this Emerging Voices book is actually the horrendous treatment and abuse of women in ISKCON, particularly in the West, is precisely what crippled the movement for so many years and turned so many people away. So
Right.
actually it is a very...
And so many of my god sisters left, and I mean, I've heard men also leaving because of how they can't live with themselves seeing the way the women are treated.
And
We're supposed to be protected.
Yeah. I don't think I would have joined at that time because, you know, I was a young American. I wanted to be at a place where women were. You know, I didn't want to
Right,
be...
exactly. And that's why devotees did join, is because there were women there too.
Yeah, it was like...
I just want to say something about your point that the abuse of women was specifically in the West. I don't know about that. I mean, I heard about different abuses after the Russian preaching, grew. I've heard about a lot. And you don't have to be as part of ISKCON in India to be an abused woman. I mean, I know so many women whose husbands are alcoholics and they beat them and they rape them. And that's just a pretty standard. I mean, it's not high echelon of people, but I know many people who have lived in different parts of India, and this is just like embedded in the culture. I mean, the level of female infanticide is horrendous.
Yeah.
They regularly kill female children as they're born because they're seen as less than and undesirable. You'll have to marry them, it'll cost money. And it's, this is part of the mentality in India. I think it's pretty interesting also because what you do see is women in India are starting to speak up and are not accepting this as much as they used to. And there are certain pockets of little movements combating the abuse of women in their homes. It's very difficult because if they speak up, they're liable to lose home, family, finances, be completely destitute.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult situation for them to speak up, but we're seeing more and more of them unwilling to just watch and take the abuse, and so it seems that this is going to increase, and it would behoove Indian preachers to see this coming instead of being in the dark ages. That this is coming to India, and you're going to be judged based on this. These attitudes toward women that are harming women. They're harming women. It's not, I mean, we're not in an era where all the men are chivalrous and protectors and really caring for the women.
Yeah.
It's just the opposite. And for whatever reason, now women are as intelligent as men. It's just like a reality we have to come to terms with, and it's truth in India as well. So it's like, I'm not sure what they're thinking about their preaching, where it's going to go, because in the future they're going to be looked at as just they're not going to be appreciated.
Prabhupada, he specifically attributed, you bring this out, it comes out in the book at least once or multiple times. Prabhupada specifically attributed his success in spreading the Hare Krishna movement to the fact that he gave women equal opportunity, and The other point that he makes is on the topic of guru is in the purport to this verse, Ye Krishna Tattvaveta She Guru Hoy. He says, unless we follow this principle, we will not be able to spread the Hare Krishna movement all over the world. And so anyway, one other thing I wanted to hear about from you was more on this topic of Yamuna Devi, that she had already felt like it was beyond what she could do. And, you know, in one sense, you could say you kind of took up the baton and you did so much, and the other devotees that you collaborated with at that time. But there was a story you mentioned that Yamuna had been asked by Srila Prabhupada to be on the GBC. And there's different versions of this story going around. I'm wondering if you heard directly from Yamuna on this topic or from a secondhand source, because I know of an interview that Nori Muster did with Yamuna, and I've been trying. A friend of mine offered to go to the UCSB Special Collections Library in Santa Barbara, where all of her tapes and the different things she donated to the library are there from her research that she did. And this one of them is this interview with Yamuna, and she tells this story, but I haven't been able to get my friend's been trying to go there, and there's like construction over there going on, so they haven't been able to get him this tape so he can listen to it, take notes, and then share with me. I'm wanting to get I want to get the exact story so that I can share it, because I think it's an important part of the history. So did you directly hear from Yamuna about this, or you just heard from Nori, or what was your, because you mentioned it in your book?
Yeah, I heard it directly from Yamuna. And what I recall, I mean, there are different versions of the story. And as I recall, what Yamuna said was that Prabhupada asked her and Govinda Dasi, and she declined because one of the people who had also been named on the GBC was the person that she had significant problem with in Vrindavan. And she just knew that this was not going to work for her to be on it. She knew this person's feelings about women, and she just wasn't going to do it.
Was this Tamal Krishna Maharaj? Because you mentioned that he had pushed back in the book. You mentioned it. And he also came around. I mean, the reason I ask is because it's significant that
that is significant. So then maybe I will say his name, because yes, it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And then in 1993, I was asked to attend the first ISKCON conference with, it was like an interfaith conference with some Christian priests. And we were at Boston, Massachusetts. I can't remember the name of the place where we were, but it was like a retreat place for Christians. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was presenting a paper there. Ravindra Swarup was there. Rukmini was there. Anutama was there. Shonak Rishi was there, and somebody from the UK, that from the devotee side. And there were a few Christians, and I can't remember all of their names. But one session, after the session, it was time for lunch. So we went for prasadam. And I got in line, and I got my prasadam, and I sat down on the table. And surprisingly to me, Tamal Krishna Maharaj came down and sat where I was sitting. I was alone at the table. And Ravindra Swarup followed him and sat down. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj looked at me and he said, I support what you're doing, because at that time it was quite well known. I was very vocal about changing things for women and how they had been changed, and that this was a problem. And can you hear this vacuum cleaner going on?
No, it's not distracting.
Okay, good. So he said that, and I was just like, I was pretty taken aback, because I didn't know that he had changed his position at all. But he said that going to school had really changed him, that he had met many intelligent women, smarter than himself. He gained a lot of appreciation for what they were doing, what they were capable of doing, and that he felt bad what he had done in ISKCON to the women, and that he was supporting what we were doing. And at that time, 1993, Sudharma was helping me. We hadn't established the women's ministry yet, but I had been doing the Priti Lakshmi newsletter, which was something that I was editing and financing, mailing out to all the managers in ISKCON around the world. And, you know, I wanted to open a dialogue between the common folk and the GBC, because there was no dialogue going on at all. And so that newsletter was, I was accepting articles, as long as they weren't offensive, I was accepting articles, publishing them, and then it was going out around the world, and I was financing that. So that was a well-known publication at the time. And that's why he was, you know, saying, he was supporting, of course, the letter that I had written to Sudhamani, and Sudhamani's letter back, and we were putting in different things into the GBC for voting, and they weren't voting on it, but he was aware of that. And so, yeah, he said that to me.
Yeah, it's really significant, I think, that he had that experience and that change of heart.
Yeah, that was very, you know, I wish I would have thought at the time to ask him to go public with that, but I was just so like surprised by his statement, and also moved and grateful that he said it to me, it was encouraging me to continue on even though it was difficult, and that he appreciated it.
That's very meaningful. Anyway, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, my intention isn't to try to, like, you know, paint anyone as bad, but I think it's important that we recognize that even really wonderful and worshipable Vaishnavas can have certain understandings and then come to, you know, come to new understanding and acknowledge mistakes that were made. And I think that's an important part of a healthy culture. So that's why I wanted to hear about that, and hear also about Tamal Krishna Maharaj's, that conversation you had with him. Let's see what else I had in my notes here. Could you share a little bit more about this Priti Lakshmi newsletter? You said you started in '89. I think it went until 2000 or so.
I think it was. Did it go till 2000? I turned it over to ISKCON News, which was headed up by Sarva Shakti. My God, his name is skipping my mind. And Kunti, they were a couple that was doing the Hare Krishna, the newspaper. Okay. And I was not well, so I had turned it over to them, and they did it for a little while. I turned it over to them, I think, in 1995, and yes, I started it in 89 or 90, and that was just part of trying to bring awareness to the issues around women, the issues around child abuse, and what devotees were experiencing and what they were frustrated about, and not being heard by the GBC. All those issues are online on the women's ministry site.
Yeah, it's mentioned as in the appendix of the book. That's where I got the 2000 date.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, I obviously I researched it to put it in the compilation, the anthology, so that would be accurate.
Where were you living throughout the 80s and the 90s? Were you still moving around a lot, or?
Yeah, I was in Gita Nagari from 1980 until 83, and then I was in Philadelphia for about a year, and then I was moved to Potomac for about a year, and then I was asked to marry Nagaraj, and we moved to Potomac, and he started working on the Back to Godhead magazine there in 1985. And then from Potomac, we went to San Diego around 89. And from San Diego, we moved to Alachua, where we've been for 30, 30, almost 40 years. Anyway, not 30 something, 36 years or something like that.
So at the end of the 80s, you moved to Alachua.
No, well, 1993.
Early 90s.
So,
Okay,
yeah,
got
so 30, right, 31 years. 31 years. So I've been here 31 years.
it. Okay, got it. Wow. Okay. One thing I was curious to hear about was your services in Gita Nagari. You mentioned you were working with the Lilamrita project and helping.
Yes. Yes.
Would you want to share a little bit about that, like how you got involved with that and what was that like, the process like? Because that's one topic I want to try to cover some, is how the Lilamrita was done and kind of the history of that.
Yeah. So Satsrup Goswami asked me to move to Gita Nagari in 1980. And in about a year later, I began typing his correspondence, and he was starting to, he was working on the Lilamrita, and the interviews were still coming in. My husband Nagaraj, along with Mahanidhi Swami, were two of the people who were doing interviews. And those interviews were still coming in and being typed. And then, of course, there was a filing system for them. The typists were already there working, two typists that were the main people that were transcribing. At a certain point, in addition to the Lilamrita, he started writing his own books, and there was somebody who was in charge of the Gita Nagari Press, and to facilitate his writing, they actually bought equipment, typesetting equipment, which was quite, a sophisticated thing to do back then.
Yeah.
And I was trained on that equipment, and the devotee who was heading up the production left Gita Nagari, left maybe Bhakti, and I became the person in charge of the Gita Nagari Press. So I was, which meant that I was doing most of the service. I was farming out the proofreading. Yamaraj was doing layout for the BBT. So he was laying out for Lilamrita. So because I was working the Gita Nagari Press, and the BBT was behind in producing the Lilamrita, they were very slow in getting out the volumes, and they were ready to go. So I began producing the last two volumes at the top. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 volumes, 5 or 6 volumes.
6 volumes.
And so the 6 volumes, so 5 and 6 I produced. I was in charge of producing that basically on behalf of the BBT.
What's that mean, produced? Like make sure the layout?
That means that Satsrup Maharaj was writing, Mandaleshwar was editing. When that process was over, we would key in the pages into typesetting equipment. That would be photo that would come out on photographic paper and developed. Then that would be proofread. Changes would be entered. The changes would be entered on the machine, then relayed, then re-sent out, and then the galleys would be laid out on by hand on mechanical tables with pages that were very clearly marked with trim lines for the book size, and then that obviously had to be proofread, and then more changes would be made, and then that would go to the printer. And so I was not only a typesetter along with one other person for those last 2 volumes, but I was proofreading and overseeing the production with the printers, in the production in-house, and then the manufacturing with the printers out of house. And so that was my involvement with the Lilamrita. And then the Gita Nagari Press, of course, then was in charge of all the files of everything that had been gathered for the research, which devotees had sent in their letters. Then there were interviews. So this was the place where all of this information was stored.
Got it. And you had to make sure that was kind of organized and
Yeah, it was very well organized. You know, everything in alphabetical order, and many filing cabinets, maybe 4 of the large filing cabinets of research.
wow. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how things got done before the whole computer digital age. It's always fun for me to hear about because it's such a different
Yeah,
process.
slowly. Yeah, on green screens that you could barely see, and then it was like HTML coding on complex, because every diacritic was several strokes, and italics was 2 strokes, and then if you forgot the ending one, of course you'd have italic through the whole page, and you have to go back and put that one missing
Wow.
character. And yeah, it was typesetting was quite complex. It's not like it is right now.
Wow. Yeah, just because you mentioned that a little bit at the beginning of the Emerging Voices book, that service you were doing. Let me see what else I had in my notes here. We covered that. Well, one topic I'm interested, but I don't know if we should get into it now or maybe schedule something in the future, is the more recent preaching you're doing through your writing and kind of how you got into that. What's your time like?
Yeah, I have a few more minutes now. It wouldn't be that long to explain if you want to go over it now, unless you want to do it separate.
Oh yeah, let's discuss that a little bit, and we could always, depending on your interest and availability, maybe schedule something else too. But
Okay,
yeah, let's.
sure. Yeah, I was very interested in the outreach, and I felt very strongly that Prabhupada had told us that we should be preaching to our Western brothers and sisters, and the preaching by circumstance and necessity, and by mercy and grace, became very much focused on the Indian body community,
Yeah,
and felt like the Western preaching was lagging and needed help. And I had heard that Jayadvaita Maharaj was trying to do a website for this kind of broader preaching, and a couple of attempts had failed, and I felt like it was something that I could do. And so I spoke with this devotee named Kamar Parni, asked him if he would join me. I didn't have strong health. I haven't had strong health for a long time. And I knew I couldn't do it all on my own. And so he agreed to help. And we brought on 2 people, Manoram and Radha, to launch Krishna.com website, which was quite an endeavor, but very successful. And as it started, so it was launched in 2000. And I had written the what we called the teaching section of that website. So it would be like the core content. And then we were developing other content and developing a store to try to support it. And we had initial funding from the BBT. And I got to thinking that I had this vision that came to me around 2002 that we really should do something about books that were reaching a broader public. And I had been watching how people were having difficulty really reading Prabhupada's Gita, and definitely having the Bhagavatam was just too much for them.
yeah,
And so, you know, this idea of introductory books was on my mind. And I wrote something called the Bhakti Campaign and presented it to the BBT trustees in 2002. And the vision was that we would find some devotees within the movement who would write books that would be introductory or bridge, and somehow bring bhakti out to a broader public. And we would take those devotees and put them on a speaking circuit in North America and Europe. And along with the books and the speaking circuit, we would do kirtan and have prasadam. And the goal of the marketing campaign was to make bhakti a household word defined as Prabhupada gave it to us, according to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And I presented that to the BBT. They were very excited about it. And they, on the spot, created something called the Special Divisions Project, and they put myself and Gopal Bhatta in charge of that division of the BBT to execute this campaign. And then tagged on to it was raising funds for the BBT, developing more of an editorial team and writers, and one other thing, and I can't remember. And somebody committed at that time. I said we needed $500,000 to execute the campaign. Somebody committed to that money, and the project began. Unfortunately, the money didn't come, and we couldn't find writers. So in 2007, I resigned, and very disappointed, because now at that time, Bhakti and Kirtan hit the yoga scene.
Yeah.
We had lost our opportunity.
Yeah.
I was just like so distressed and so distraught that we had lost the opportunity. And now Bhakti was this mishmash of something that was not clear. And Kirtan was not just necessarily of the Maha Mantra, or the place of Maha Mantra Kirtan had not been well established. So I resigned, and then I got a little voice that said, write. And I said, no, I can't write. I'm not a writer. I don't know how to write. And I just spent 5 years looking for writers to do this. And we didn't come up with anybody for whatever reason. And I wouldn't do that. So I fought against this little voice for about 1.5 years, but it wouldn't go away. So I started studying writing. I took some courses and joined a local writers group and attended that every week for a number of years, about 7 years actually. And I found there a writing mentor who was helping me. And I started writing a blog. Didn't go anywhere, wasn't successful in any way. And I was very frustrated. I felt like I lacked the terminology that was free of ISKCONisms and free of Christian weighted terms that could describe bhakti in a universal language. And I was having a lot of trouble finding it. I was like on the ground begging, please, Krishna, reveal this, because it's not coming. And I knew this was something that was important to be able to really break through. And then I attended a program where Tripurari Swami, who was not in ISKCON, was speaking. And my God, he had the vocabulary.
He's
and
such a gifted preacher. He's
a very gifted preacher. He's very intelligent. And I think that, by not being in the movement, he wasn't sequestered, right, by the culture. So he had to figure out how to speak, right?
Yes.
So he had done it. And I was like blown away. I was just like, oh my God, now we can have the books. And I asked him to do it and to write. And he said, no, he was focusing on writing for a Gaudiya Vaisnava audience that were practitioners.
Yes.
And he said, but people who are listening to me could write. And there was a sequence of events. And then wise love came to me, and I saw the whole book practically in a flash. Actually, I had been listening to Tripurari's contemporary talks, and but they weren't. It wasn't. I couldn't find a whole, but it gave me some ideas, and then then the whole thing just revealed itself to me. The whole book, literally, like I saw it. Oh, and I saw it as like a rising moon, from a dark moon to a full moon, and it should be an exploration of consciousness. And I didn't have to use any ISKCON terms, and to talk in a fresh language, some fresh way to communicate what the bhakti is, the theology, the philosophy, the experience. And it took a while. I mean, it took me 4 years to write Wise Love. A lot of that, I was very, very ill, and but it was coming out. So the book came out, and then I had already been writing in my blog about what I was calling the feminine divine, which was within the broader community. It's like people talk about the sacred feminine,
yes,
feminine divine. They tend to be feminists and want to worship a goddess, but they were like missing key points. And I felt like, and then I was reading some of their texts, and oh my God, the couple of times that Radha was mentioned was just horrendous. And I was like, there needs to be a Gaudiya Vaisnava needs to correct this, how Radha is being portrayed in the goddess yoga community, and how prominent Durga was in without recognizing Radha's position. And so I had been thinking about this and writing about it, and then but I didn't think I could do it because, well, first of all, after Wise Love, I said I'll never write another book again. That's not possible. It was just like it took everything out of me. But I was just thinking of Radha and, just how to introduce Radha properly. And also I felt like this was such a large segment of the population that are goddess worshippers and feminists that are, they're trying to like develop their own theology basically. But they were missing I felt like they were missing key elements. And if I could introduce Radha, it would fill out things for them and perhaps attract them obviously to Radha. But I felt like I couldn't do it because I wouldn't be able to properly represent Radha. But also I felt like, how am I going to address Durga Ma properly without offending those who are her followers? And so I didn't think I could do it. And but anyway, I came back on the first day of Kartik. I was sitting in a friend's room chanting japa, and I saw how I could speak about Durga, and the whole book kind of like came to me, and tears came to my eyes. And I said to my friend sitting there, I think I'm being allowed to write this book, Bhakti Shakti. And so it came out. And then I had, while I was in Vrindavan, this one devotee named Mahendra in Bulgaria. He had really liked Wise Love. He wanted to translate it into Bulgarian. But he was saying, I think our preaching should really promote kirtan, and I want to do a website on kirtan. And I said, well, do you think we should have a book on kirtan? He said, yeah. And I said, well, maybe I should write a book on kirtan. And so and he said, yeah. And so after, because that inspiration was given in Vrindavan, I felt like I should follow through on that. And so after I wrote Bhakti Shakti, I just went right into Prem Kirtan, and that both Bhakti Shakti and Prem Kirtan, they pretty much flowed. And I was just like witnessing this it was an amazing experience, because I would be stuck. I wouldn't know what to say the next day on blank paper. And then I was like, I don't know where to go. And then I would hear a lecture or read something. It was like, oh my God, that's it. And I would just like take notes and put it down and then adjust it to how I thought it could be received by an audience. And so what was happening is I was just witnessing this transcendental system that was just working every single day. It was repeated. So it was like this real faith building experience where it was just repeated every single day. It wasn't when it first happened, I was like, oh, that was kind of amazing. That's kind of cool. But it just happened and happened and happened. And I was like, oh my Krishna, I guess they're meant to come out.
Very special.
So that's how it happened.
So when was that first time when you were attending that seminar or class with Tripurari Maharaj? What year was that?
That was in 2013. And I had already, been studying writing, and I'd started my blog in 2010. It wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't finding the vocabulary. So it was years that I was beating my head against the wall. Where's the fresh vocabulary? Where's the fresh idea? How do you present this in ways? And the other thing I was very determined about is that, they say when you write for a broader audience, you should write at the level of a 10th grade audience, because that's the basic,
Even less.
And I was like, and less, right, also. But I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I want to write to the intelligentsia of America and Europe who are interested in Buddhism and have no idea what bhakti is and how much it has to offer. The gems of bhakti are so amazing that I really felt like it captures people's attention if we can just express it in ways that are they can relate to. And so I didn't attempt to dumb down the topic. And so they tend to be philosophical, but as simple as I could. And I'm hearing that they're except for there's a couple chapters like in Wise Love that are really philosophical, but I felt that they really, well, in Prema Kirtan too, but I felt that they really needed to be there. There was no way around it.
I read a good chunk of Wise Love. I've been meaning to go back to it. But hearing from you now, I definitely am thinking I want to go back and look at the books again. You mentioned that you're now leading some groups. So when was when did Prema Kirtan come out? You released that?
Prema Kirtan came out in November of 2022.
Okay.
And 2023, November 2022, right? I think so. Anyway, I had to stop everything at that time. Again, I was very sick, and I had to focus on my health. And it took a year of really significantly working on many things to stabilize. And then I went to Sadhu Sangha last year, 2023, which, yeah, that's the release of Prem Kirtan. And I met some people that, and I kept meeting people that were like, and I've heard about this for years, that women will tell me, we really want the association of Prabhupada's senior Vaishnavi devotees, but we don't have it and we can't get it. And, my god sisters, they're taking care of families, they have ill health, they don't have finances. It's not like the men where they'll get sponsored.
Yeah.
We're not thought of, and we're not able for different reasons to do that. So I thought, well, the pandemic showed us that so much can go online. So maybe I just, make myself available to these women and I'm here to just talk about bhakti and how things are going in your life and how to apply bhakti and, and just what's going on for your sadhana and what the experience is, what I experienced, and, just share. And so that just developed from that time in Sadhu Sangha. I'm talking to initiated devotees and uninitiated and brand new people, and some people who have read my books have reached out to me, and I'm in a dialogue with them. And so that's how it started, and it's just very simple, and it's something that I can manage to do with a body that has its limitations.
The internet is, a real blessing in some ways, at least, that we can use it.
Yeah, have to be careful.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. I'm really happy to hear about these groups of devotees, and I hope that in the near future, all of these sensitive, controversial issues will somehow or other will get some better reconciliation, and it won't be such a difficult topic that comes up. I'm praying about that. I recently had I did an interview with Kalakanta Prabhu as part of this, and then there was some comments on the YouTube, and I got into a discussion, and that led to discussing outside of YouTube, trying to approach devotees to try to have, like you're saying, a thoughtful and respectful exchange. But my experience it was very emotional and very narrow-minded, and it's such a divisive issue. So it's sad. I think that the dream Prabhupada, it's so prophetic. Of course, because it's Srila Prabhupada, but that he appeared to you, and this is dividing my movement. It's so true today also.
Yeah. He was very distressed in that dream. He was very distressed. He was extremely distressed.
So, anyway. But somehow Mahaprabhu's in control.
Yeah. Yes.
So do you have any other plans for writing, or you're sticking with the 3?
The Bhakti Trilogy, unless something was guided, I felt guided that was what I was asked to do, and the service is complete. And now I just hope, devotees are becoming aware of them. They're really important outreach tools for people, for projects, for people, for programs, Prem Kirtan, especially for all these Kirtan programs that go on, to really highlight the position of the Mahamantra Kirtan as Prem Kirtan, not just Bhakti Kirtan or music. And the experience of japa, and just the core. It's interesting because the trilogy really what's happening with is, I didn't plan it this way, but in Wise Love, you have like the core basic philosophical, theological foundation. Bhakti Shakti is an introduction to the three primary energies, Jiva Shakti, Maya Shakti, Swarup Shakti, and the two goddesses, and the opportunity Jiva has to have relationships with the two goddesses and their roles and what that means for the Jiva. And then you have Prem Kirtan, which is the core anga, main anga of Bhakti, as Kirtan and Japa. And so it's like you get like a solid foundation for a understanding of the Bhakti theology, practice, and philosophy in those three books. Like if you get I really do feel like, you know, people will be better prepared for Prabhupada's books by giving them the opportunity to be exposed to bhakti in a way that's relatable for them where they are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really special. I pray many people will read them and benefit.
Hare Krishna, thank you. You're so kind. Anyway, the seva's done. It's not in my control. I've done as much as I could.
One writer I've heard compare publishing a book to like having a child. You just have to send it out into the world, and then it does what it.
Has a life of its own. Yeah, you have no control over it.
Well, maybe we'll conclude there for now.
Thank you.
Feel very grateful. I am going to continue spending time with the Emerging Voices book. It's a really valuable resource, giving historical perspective.
And philosophical perspective. There's really good content in there from so many people that they've wrestled with these controversial quotes in Shastra, and you know, this present a way to look at these things.
Yeah, it's almost like, you know, for each individual, there's this gap between our philosophy and then what we're actually able to apply, and it's difficult to live with that. It can be, you know, humiliating or frustrating because we know, you know, I want to be here, but actually what I'm able to do is here. And then as a society, we also have that gap, and hopefully as ISKCON matures, we'll continue to close the gap in terms of the kind of spiritual movement Srila Prabhupada wanted to be able to offer the world, and, you know, what he
and how do we include people properly? It's, you know, these ideas of social structures that are not inclusive of a broad range of people is small. It's very small. It's not helpful.
So hopefully Krishna will pave the way forward for us. We definitely need that help. So, okay, well.
Good luck to your service, Lokaram. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for your time.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.